Welcome back, all you lovely people. I hope you had a nice stretch and feel ready to get into this. All right. So again, this module is, a little break from meta ethics. I thought we could use a break. That was pretty deep. The nature and root of morality is tough. So again, I wanted to have a nice little interlude down the middle of this unit to talk about an issue in applied ethics. Remember, applied ethics, it's a nice little area. Applied ethics asks what should be done in this specific case or on this specific issue. And again, the specific issue that we're looking at here in this unit concerns the question of, how can we get women and other underrepresented groups into positions of leadership in the business? And I think, looking at these arguments will give us a nice way to practice moral cognitivism. Again, we're going to look at James Rachel's arguments in defense of quotas. And so, and I should say, I think he would approve of the quotas we're seeing in California and Europe for women. So, we can get this argument about why quotas make sense. But before we do that, that'll be the next video. This video, I want to consider James Rachel's study of Heightism. Now, I'll just say, I don't know if seems clear that James Rachel's does not think that Heightism is an important social issue that we need to be solving directly. Though again, maybe we should. I'll let you guys people decide. I'll just say, look, I am as tall as you can be and still be considered short. I know it's shocking. You can't tell because I'm sitting down. I'd stand up, but I'm wearing shorts under. I just picked up a pizza and the guy was looking at me dressed like this and then my gym shorts on. That's how we roll during COVID days. What was I talking about? Yes, I am as tall as you can be, but still be short. If I'd only been an inch taller, I would at least be medium-sized. Ugh. At least my wife is shorter than me. I got lucky. Anyway, but you guys might be saying, okay, well, hold on, Professor Gray. What is this Heightism that we're talking about here? And that's easy enough, I guess. Heightism is just a prejudice or bias that tends to favor taller people. And Rachel's does give some evidence that Heightism exists. He looks at salaries, taller people make more. We look at preferential hiring, taller people tend to get the job. He looks at American elections with presidents, and that makes sense, though I will say, just by the way, Al Gore was an inch taller than George W. Bush, but, well, Gore did win the popular vote, but not the presidency. So sometimes the shorter guy wins, but not often. But the point is Rachel's, and I think this isn't terribly surprising, that there does seem to be at least some bias against shorter people. And he also has some theories about, why this might be, why taller people tend to get slightly special treatment. And he gives various examples, like ordering students in a class from tallest to shortest. This never happened to me, but I have met, students of mine have said that, no, they had to do this like in kindergarten or something, where the teacher would order them from tallest to shortest. And so you start to already become conscious of who's tall, who's short. He gives the theory that maybe we just subconsciously associate tall people with our parents, because when we were little, we're always looking up to our parents. Now, I don't know if you guys know Professor Ryan Muldoon. He's also in the philosophy department, a good friend of mine. But I don't know if you know him or not, but he is a very tall guy compared to me. I'm just a little man next to this guy. He's a tall guy. So whenever I'm with him, I'm like, Daddy, up, Daddy. Not really, but I do. Maybe I listen to him more than I should. Anyhow, he's a good friend. Don't tell him I said that. Anyhow, it seems like Heightism at least is a phenomenon of some kind. Though again, I'll be clear, Rachel's does not think this is as bad as racism or sexism. He does say, look, maybe there's still not enough evidence to suggest, that Heightism is a social concern that, we should be doing something about. But again, short people. You with me, short people? Let's get our signs together. Short Lives Matter, #SLM. Join me at Niagara Square tonight. We march. We'll tell Mayor Brown we should stand up for the little man and the little women.
Let me hold you, little man, as the parade passes by.
Let me hold you, little man. Well, anyway, I'm sorry. If Rachel's doesn't think this is an important social issue, well, then why is he bringing it up? And he brings this up for three different reasons that are very, I think, interesting. Because first he says, look, Heightism shows that prejudice and bias can be unconscious, and yet it can influence us. So like I said, I don't really think anyone is against short people. I don't think people are like, let's hire all the tall people and we'll rule the world. I don't think anyone's really thinking that way. So I don't think, I don't walk down the street nervous thinking, oh, they know I'm short. I don't think, unless of course you're really short, things can get different. But anyway, I don't think anyone's actively plotting against short people. And yet we see that from the data, the evidence is that shorter people are getting paid less, getting less promotions, and so on. So again, the data, this is just saying the bias is unconscious. No one's plotting against short people. And yet clearly decisions are being influenced by height somehow, at least in small ways. And similarly, I think for the most part, I hope that most people aren't plotting against women and persons of color outside of, the fringe on the internet. But I think most people aren't plotting against women and people of color. And yet the decisions, just looking at the statistics, tend to favor white men. And again, this can be because we're having bias and prejudice that are completely unconscious, but yet they influence us. That's the scary kind of thing, is that people may legitimately not be racist or sexist, and yet their decisions are unconsciously favoring one group over another. And I like this paper. It's really old, but it's caught on now because today we call this implicit bias. The idea that people can have attitudes and stereotypes that do affect how we understand, act, and decide, but it's done in an unconscious manner. Again, we're not plotting against anyone, but yet these unconscious things influence us. So again, this is today called implicit bias. Rachel's didn't have a term for it when he wrote this. So that's a recent thing that finally has a label. It's kind of cool. That's why it's cool. He's like ahead of the curve here, man. Anyhow, so again, he's trying to say, by talking about Heightism, he's showing how prejudice and bias can be unconscious, and yet it also influences us. So again, this is the idea of implicit bias he's trying to illustrate with Heightism. The next point is that so that's number one. Number two, Heightism shows that we can rationalize our prejudices and biases so that we don't think, or they don't seem like prejudices and bias. Now, I will say we're rationalizing. Rationalize is not a good word. Don't use it in your papers. You're reasoning. Reasoning is good. Rationalizing is bad, because rationalizing means, the sense is that you're inventing something to justify your decision in this case. And that's what they said. So if you ask the people why they hired the taller person, they're not going to say, oh, because they're taller. Of course, we only hire tall people here. No, of course not, because they don't think that. But what they'll say, well, they had more experience, the taller person, or they had better qualifications. And I think they really believe that. I don't think they're operating in bad faith or trying to deceive us, because it's unconscious. But that's the scary part about human beings, is that things can influence us subconsciously. We're not even aware of it. Yet, when we're asked about it, we invent reasons. We rationalize why we did what we did. They were more qualified. They had better experience. And indeed, if you're a woman or a person of color in a business or organization, I've interviewed many in my own work, and they always say that they hear this all the time, that they get turned down for promotions or jobs, and then somewhere along the lines of, well, you're just not the right fit for us, or you need a little more seasoning, like you're a chicken for dinner or something. I don't know. You're like a buffalo wing. Seasoning, you get it. Anyway, now I'm hungry. Yeah, so women and persons of color are disproportionately affected, but no one's, again, I don't think anyone's consciously trying to not hire them. They do rationalize excuses, again, but they're not aware of it. That's why this is so scary, is that, and I like Heightism because it just illustrates it, that we're able to rationalize our, because I don't think anyone's seriously against, short people, or people my height, for sure, but yet they're rationalized so that we're not even aware that they're going on. That's the thing. They're unconscious and they're kind of hiding from us. And there's a lot of psychology. If you're taking a course on psych, you'll probably talk about stuff like this, about how we how that all works. Okay, so what have we seen? We've seen two things now about Heightism and what it's showing us. So first, it's revealing this idea of implicit bias, namely, we can have prejudices and biases that we're completely unconscious of, and yet these things do affect how we act and decide. Heightism, also number two, shows us that it's very easy for us to rationalize our decisions when even though they might be influenced by prejudice and bias, but we rationalize so it doesn't seem that way. And again, I think we're being honest when we do it, in the sense, like, I don't think they're really conscious of doing these things, but yet they're making these excuses nonetheless. That's the second one. And the third is that that Heightism shows us that even sensitive people can fall into traps of prejudice and bias, because it's unconscious. So I could really be wanting to be good and fair, and yet study after study shows that you can show people their biases, and those people are like, oh man, that's awful, I don't want to be like that. And yet they go back to hiring tall people. And, we're right back into those habits. Again, because it's unconscious. That's what makes it so hard. I will say, I think it's possible to work with, but it's not easy. You can't take a sensitivity training class. You're probably not going to get much out of that except time wasted. But anyway, the point is, this is why implicit bias is so insidious. We want to be good people, and yet we get tripped up against our will, as it seems. Again, that's when it's in the unconscious, that's the whole point. Again, that's why what therapy is supposed to deal with is how to bring those things out, and so we can correct ourselves.
Tell me about your mother.
Anyway, Heightism teaches us three things about prejudice and bias. Again, the first is about implicit bias, how prejudice and bias can be unconscious and yet influence our decision. The second thing we see from Heightism is that we can rationalize our prejudices and biases so it doesn't seem like we're acting with prejudice and bias. We invent a story. And again, we're good at that. It's scary, but we are. And we're not even aware of it again. And then three, even sensitive people who care and want to be better can fall into the traps of implicit bias and prejudice. And so, like I said, this is pretty cool, because this, I think, will have some profound impact on the debate that comes up that we'll talk about in the next video about quotas. But it's cool because he's talking about prejudice and bias as it exists right now today. He's not talking about historical injustices like slavery or the subjugation of women. No, he's not talking about historical injustices or the need to rectify or correct those injustices. Now, maybe that has to happen. That's a separate issue. But for Rachel's here in this article for quotas, he's ultimately going to say, we're not using quotas about fixing what happened in the past. That is a complicated issue that is not the subject of Rachel's paper. Rachel says, I want to look at situations where there might be unconscious bias right now. We might think of these as, again, implicit bias or systematic injustice or whatever you want to call it. These unconscious things that exist now that are influencing our decisions now. Again, the past is a different story. Rachel's is not talking about whether or not we owe reparations for past evil or wrong or harms. That's a different story. Also a very you can imagine a very contentious story as well. Not this story. Again, Rachel's wants to talk about today. And I think if Rachel's is dead, I think I mentioned this a while back. He died, gosh, a while back now. But I'm sure if he was alive, he would say that there's probably is enough evidence to suggest that there is systematic implicit bias against women and persons of color, especially when we look at those statistics about leadership positions. I think he would be concerned by that, especially given, how many white males are in leadership positions compared to everyone else. And so that, again, is something to think about as well. And so I will say he would think, again, racism, sexism are social issues we should be addressing now. Heightism, maybe not. But again, maybe we should be more concerned. That's another story. But again, Rachel's is, I think he would say that, yes, we have implicit bias with women and persons of color that need to be addressed along the sort that I just talked about. But anyhow, his solution to this will be using quotas. He thinks quotas will be the way to kind of weaken the implicit or systematic biases that might exist and give, women and persons of color a fairer shake. But I get ahead of myself. So we'll talk about that in a moment. I think we've covered Heightism and implicit bias enough. Hopefully, at least you have a sense of where Rachel's is coming from. It's a difficult issue, so I don't expect you to agree with it all, of course. Agree to disagree. Didn't we say that was bad? Anyway, no, feel free to challenge that. That's how things work here. But at least I hope you understand where he's coming from. That's what I care about. So, hey, I'm going to get a snack and some water. You get a snack and some water. Then we'll come back. I shouldn't point. You get a snack and water. And then we can come back and talk about Rachel's justification for quotas. I'll see you back here in a moment.